Welcome to the Atlantic Council's celebration of Veterans Day 2020. I am Adrienne Arsht, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Atlantic Council and founder of the Council's Resilience Center and Latin America Center. Today's event highlights the Atlantic Council's celebration of veterans on this Day of Remembrance. On behalf of our chairman, John Rogers, President Fred Kemp, and the rest of the board and staff, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to those who have served in our military. Your courage and sacrifices are admired and valued. War Words was written as a play and then adapted for the film by the playwright Michelle Kolos Brooks. She created a tapestry of the funny, strange, heroic, and heartbreaking stories of men and women who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. This filmed adaptation of War Words has been produced in partnership with Washington's esteemed Arena Stage and was directed by the company's deputy artistic director, Seema Sueko. It had been our original intention to mark Veterans Day with a live, on-stage, full reading of the play. But the pandemic has made that impossible. But the show must go on. And these artists have conceived a succinct rendering of the play's essence, and in a form that itself is a heartening testament to the resilience of creative minds. Resilience is something I care deeply about, but that's a story for another day. After the film, be sure to stay with us. Steve Grundman, the production's executive producer and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, will convene a panel discussion with Michelle, Seema, and Nate Grazer, an Army chaplain whose story is depicted in the film. This segment covers their collaboration developing the script and film. As a lifelong supporter of the arts, I believe passionately in the power of the arts to highlight important issues of public policy and promote engagement in these issues. War Words is just such a powerful work of art. And now, I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing another Atlantic Council board member, my friend, General David Petraeus, who is going to offer his own reflections on Veterans Day and War Words. David, as many of you know, is a retired four-star general of the U.S. Army, whose 37-year career included a succession of combat commands that decisively shaped the American and Allied campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2011, President Obama named him director of the CIA. Today, David is a partner in the investment firm of KKR and chairman of its Global Institute. General Petraeus, David, the stage is yours.
Well, thanks for the kind introduction, Adrienne, and more importantly, thank you for the exceptional leadership and extraordinary support that you provide to the Atlantic Council. I am delighted to have this opportunity to add my voice to the Atlantic Council's celebration of Veterans Day 2020. And it is a particular pleasure to help present the centerpiece of today's event, a short film that has been adapted from a stage play, War Words, which I have seen and enjoyed, and which I am pleased to introduce to this Veterans Day audience. Veterans Day is very special to me. I know well the qualities Americans honor and remember on this day: the love of country, the desire to serve a mission larger than self, the capacity for sheer determination and courage, and of course, the willingness to sacrifice. The vast majority of my adult life was spent in uniform with individuals who exemplified these qualities, and I have abiding affection and deep admiration for them, especially those with whom I was privileged to serve in the post 9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thus, November 11th, the date when our nation pauses to recognize our veterans, their service, and their sacrifice, is particularly meaningful for me. Veterans Day can and should, however, also serve an additional civic purpose. And this was at the root of the Atlantic Council's support for development of war words for the stage and also this film adaptation of it. Ideally, Veterans Day should help reduce the distance between Americans and their nation's professional warriors, a distance that has grown in recent decades, no matter how heartfelt have been the expressions of gratitude that our society bestows on those who have served our nation in uniform. In truth, too few Americans enjoy personal relationships with servicemen and women, our veterans, and their families. This gap is no one's fault. It exists as a natural consequence of the facts that we have a professional military and that proportionally fewer and fewer Americans serve in it, with those who do often concentrated in certain geographic areas and in families with a history of service across our country. But if Americans' appreciation of our warriors is fulsome but lacking in real affinity, we suffer a certain civic deficit, which, among other adverse effects, can erode citizens' engagement with the difficult problems and significant opportunities for which American leadership in the world is critically important. It was a true pleasure late last year to watch the Los Angeles workshop production of War Words, a captivating play written by Michelle Collis Brooks, directed by Sarah Norris, underwritten by the Atlantic Council, and performed by a terrific cast. The script was based on interviews Michelle did with military veterans, most of whom had served in Iraq and Afghanistan. As these were wars that I commanded at the height of each, that I oversaw as the commander responsible for the greater Middle East, and that I later followed closely as the director of the CIA, I was keenly interested in the production. What I found was that many of the reflections in it were not just familiar to me, they struck important chords with me as well. In fact, War Words captures very powerfully the experiences of America's veterans, especially those who have served in uniform since 9/11. It vividly conveys the intensity of the relationships among those in the so-called brotherhood of the close fight, which has, of course, increasingly included women as well as men. It also captures superbly the capriciousness of a battlefield that features indiscriminate improvised explosive devices and mines. And it conveys the emotions that follow seeing one's battle buddy killed or seriously wounded, the pernicious effects of green on blue insider attacks, the sacrifices made not just by those in uniform, but by their families as well, the occasional absurdity of war and the activities that surround it, the significant contributions of and risks taken by host nation battlefield translators, the emotions on taking off the uniform for the last time, and the tendency, even in the toughest of times, to seek refuge in the notion that it could always be worse. All of that rang true with me. Yet despite all of the hardships, challenges, and sacrifices on the battlefield, I think that many veterans of the post 9/11 wars will agree with one of the play's concluding statements. I would go back and do it all again. I have always felt the same, although I do not want to glorify war, just service. Because as one of the other final lines in this exceptional production notes, war will break your heart. Few movies or plays have ever captured all of this for me as powerfully as War Words. And I hope that you find it as compelling as I have and agree with the reasoning behind the Atlantic Council's decision to support this important production. Thank you.
We all know the slogans. The few, the proud, be all that you can be. But how many of us actually know people in the military? I mean, statistically, they're not likely to be your sons or daughters, your wives or husbands. We don't buy war bonds to support them or ration what we have so that the troops could have a little more. Okay, sometimes we make our kids send the troops our leftover Halloween candy or a few boxes of Girl Scout cookies.
Tell them to stop hoarding the Thin Mints.
The troops are just like us, people. We need Thin Mints too.
They cost the same as rah-rah raisins. No one likes the rah-rah raisins.
Rah-rah
Settle
boo.
down, settle down.
No one wants that. Ugh.
This long war, Iraq and Afghanistan, we've been at it since 2001, 19 years. The war is officially old enough to enlist. People have been deployed 3, 4, 5 times during those years. We clap for them in airports and thank them for their service. And we love those YouTube videos where they come home in fatigues and they surprise their kids at school, right? We've learned to say we don't support the war, but we support our troops. But who are our troops? Do we know them? I mean, statistically, you may not, because the percentage of Americans who actually serve in the armed forces is less than 0.5% of our entire population. There's no draft, and no one has to join anymore. So, who the hell would want to do something like that?
I wanted to be an art historian, but when recruiters showed up on campus, I started thinking about my dad. He passed away by then, but he always felt so bad that he was the only one of his brothers who hadn't gone to Vietnam. He was the last born twin, so he had to stay behind. I guess I was doing it for his honor. I was so small that when I walked into the Army recruitment office, they took one look at me and were like, huh, we don't need any of that. So I marched right next door and I signed up to be a Marine. Heavy equipment mechanic, and I was good at it too. So, suck on that, Army.
After growing up in a strict Muslim household, I kind of let loose in college. My dad saw my grades and said, hey, now, I'm not going to pay for C's. You're going to have to find another way to fund your education. I joined the Air Force.
I loved playing soldier as a kid.
I wanted to get out of my shit small life in my shit small town and make something of myself.
I was a technology nerd and I loved to fly. What better ingredients for a drone pilot?
Oh, no, not me. I just married one of them. Talk to Danny.
I didn't know what to do with myself out of high school. I needed a purpose.
If we don't know the people who serve, if they are not us, then we don't have to actually see the consequence of sending them into harm's way. I'm a chaplain in the U.S. Army, and the one thing I learned for sure after years of counseling people is you have to walk. To heal and to bridge gaps and to make sense of the insanity of the world around you, I believe that you have to walk and walk and walk some more. And wander and wonder out loud. So, let's try to make sense of this whole thing. Walk with us. Just make sure to keep an eye out for these. IED, improvised explosive device. It's not big technology that's killed so many of our friends. It's these. In Iraq or Afghanistan, you never know where or when you'll encounter an IED, so you're always on edge. And that anxiety can come home with you. Sometimes it never leaves. even if you're a stay-at-home dad in a quiet little suburb of Colorado.
I just retired after 25 years of service. It was a sad day for me. I mean, what am I if I'm not a soldier? I joined at 17, so it was the military that taught me how to eat right, take care of my body, talk to people, earn respect, and respect others. I was a ranger with 2 tours in Iraq. I have seen and done it all, but nothing has been more challenging or important to me than being a father. Maybe because my dad left when I was 6. My mother raised 3 kids by working 3 jobs. I grew up eating candy bars for dinner. I retired because I didn't think I could be a good dad while still being a soldier. But my wife, Emily,
We met serving in Iraq.
she's got a few years until retirement. Now she's being deployed again.
We finally told the kids today. Isaac took it the worst.
He cried and said, "Why can't Daddy go instead?"
I told John to store my wedding ring in our safety deposit box because if I don't make it, I don't want it to get lost.
She made Thanksgiving dinner the other night, since she won't be here for the real thing.
Man, how are you going to plan the holidays without me?
I'd rather plan a full combat mission against an enemy city.
I know. The last few hours with the kids are spent like every night. What do you do differently? Although I let the kids sleep in the bed with us.
I don't look forward to breaking them of that.
You know, the last thing I remember is Isaac saying he didn't want me to leave and something about someone farting in the bed.
Oh, that was probably Isaac, because he. I get tired of people saying it won't be that bad when she goes away. I mean, you got social media and other forms of communication, but no amount of technology replaces physical presence. The touch of a mother, her smile when I do something crazy.
The laugh of my best friend.
You want to know why these scare me now more than they did while I was deployed? Because her specialty is destroying them before they destroy us.
I do what's called EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. You may remember it from The Hurt Locker.
You hated that movie.
Well, it was so wrong. It was just all the over the top pulling on the wires and projectiles coming up. What a crock. We take every possible precaution before we put Jeremy Renner in the bomb suit to take the long walk. That's what we call it, the long walk.
The long wait.
Yeah, my worst EOD experience was during my last deployment. Actually, we had to clear this area called Route Gold, and it was a nightmare because it hadn't really been traveled by us before. So this whole area just looked like an entire landfill had erupted, and it was hard to know what was trash and what could detonate. So we're crawling along, we're shining our spotlights when suddenly, boom! I mean, IEDs just start exploding all around us like crazy. And before we can react to that, somewhere in the black of night, an insurgent assaults us with a grenade launcher. So the world was like erupting and thundering all around us. I thought for sure I was going to die. But by some miracle, our whole formation managed to survive. Although one of my guys got hurt pretty bad. He lost part of his hip.
She and her sister used to play this awful game before she was deployed. You remember that?
Yeah. If we had to lose a body part, what part would we lose?
I hated that game.
I know. It was just my way of processing.
I lost part of my ear.
No, that was a bar fight. It doesn't count.
Felt like it counted at the time.
No. We have a saying in the Army, shit happens and then you drive on. Well, after that night at Route Gold, I had to go out the next day and do it all over again. So I'm driving on And then a year later, doctor says, so, it's breast cancer. And I flashed back to Root Gold. In the end, though, I felt lucky that the cancer chose a body part I could lose. I had nursed my 3 kids already. I didn't need these anymore.
Yeah, at least it wasn't your lungs. At least it wasn't your brain.
Shit happens, and then you drive on. Could have been worse. Oh, when I was in Iraq, me and the other girl in my unit used to play another game. It could always be worse. It could always be worse. The AC could be down, because Iraq without AC is torture. Or it could always be worse. We could be under fire. It could be worse. They could be serving whatever horrible meal is in the mess hall right now.
I mean, you could have needed chemo.
Yeah.
You could have not made it.
Yeah, it could always be worse. Or you could be deployed, and I could be raising our 3 crazy-ass kids by myself. It could always be worse.
What am I going to feed the kids for dinner?
When I enlisted, my recruiter told me I had nothing to worry about in terms of combat. Then the first Gulf War started and I got sent to Saudi Arabia. And I did not want to go because it was like, I didn't join up to go to war. You know what I mean? Then what's funny is, I kind of went into the military to rebel against my family and Islam, but spending time in Saudi Arabia and later Iraq changed all that. My name and my religion gave me credibility with Iraqi senior officials. They had an instant comfort with me that the others in my unit couldn't get right off the bat. Plus, I spoke Arabic because my parents dragged me to Muslim school when I was a kid. I didn't much like it at the time, but I was sure grateful for it later. That's why I'm such a big believer in diversity. My background created an inherent trust with the locals, and that improved our ability to get our mission done. Now that I'm a colonel, I try to set an example for the younger troops by going to my religious services on Fridays, because if you can't bring your whole self to work, you're not going to be as high of a performer, right? It's my responsibility because of my rank to create that kind of environment for everyone, whether they're Muslim or Buddhist or Jewish, whatever the situation is. If you have to hide your religion or the person you love or who you really are, well, you can't bring your whole self to work. And if the troops in my command don't feel respected for their whole selves, well, that's going to affect them on the battlefield. And that will impact our ability to win.
Some guy in my civilian job asked me if being a Green Beret was like Call of Duty. I knew that he was kidding, but I could not have been more angry. Anger at the fact that I had been overseas for years. I had put my life on the line for years, only to have people think that my experience was the equivalent of a video game, where it's fun to blow shit up, and if you get shot, you can just reboot and start all over again. If that were true, you can be damn sure my buddy Tim would be alive. Tim didn't just die. He was shot in the back. It's called green on blue violence. Work with from, say, the Afghan National Army, a guy that you have worked side by side with for days or weeks or months, suddenly hauls off and shoots you. See, the Taliban doesn't like that the Afghan guy is working with the Americans. So they give him a choice. Either he murders you or the Taliban murders his entire family. Let me ask you something. What is the biggest decision that you had to make today? There have been more than 300 incidents of green on blue violence since our troops have been in Afghanistan, and I will tell you that is an institutional failure. Because there's no policy that would have allowed this Afghan guy's family to come on base and be protected. So when the Taliban gave this guy a choice, he had no choice. And the fact that it has happened over 300 times indicates to me that we just don't give a shit. We used to call Tim a gentle giant. He was this huge guy, you know, John Cena type. He was the type of guy that would carry loads of equipment and you if necessary. When I got the call that he had been killed, I was in the reserves back in the US, but I was still leading my unit. I was also working a corporate job as a consultant in the healthcare industry. If you think war sucks, try putting on a suit and being a consultant in the healthcare industry. Our team decided that we had to essentially deploy to New Jersey, where Tim's family was located. Our mission was to get Tim home and get Tim to the funeral. And a military funeral isn't an easy thing. There is a shitload of paperwork. And by 2013, the death of a soldier wasn't that much of a big deal. You know, to the military, Tim was just like any other soldier. They weren't in a rush to get him home. But we did not want Tim's family to wait. We took over a local firehouse and we made it our base. We even slept there. And that's where we coordinated everything. The vans to get the family around, the flowers, who would march with the casket. No one, not the Army or the fucking DOD, would get on it and help. I needed a flag detail and they wouldn't give me an answer for days. And I'm like, I got a guy who needs to come home and I can't even get a fucking flag out here. Once the body got to Dover to be checked, cleaned, all of that, we thought it would be hours before Tim got home. It took days. Days. I finally said to a couple of my guys, just go in and fucking get him. I don't care if you have to hurt someone. I really don't. Just get him. And finally, we had a really nice funeral. But for me, I considered myself to be deployed at that point. I may have been in New Jersey, but I was leading an operation. I did not have time to grieve. I hadn't even spoken to Tim's mother yet. And when I finally did, I had a real challenge. I didn't know how to tell her that it was okay. I couldn't because it was a lie. The only thing that I could say to her was that I loved your son. Tim was one of the very best that we had. And I couldn't say, it's all okay, Tim's a hero. Because at the end of the day, Tim got shot in a really shitty gravel pile in Afghanistan.
My job was to provide support with the Afghan women who weren't allowed to talk to our men. Now, I was in great shape back then, but the work was still physically challenging. One night, we're in this valley and we have to cross a stream. Now, it's too wide to jump across, so we just have to march straight through. Now, most of the dudes, the water is knee, thigh, hip high at most. But for me, I was up to my neck in it. Literally, I'm like, well, this is my life. So I trudged through, holding out my weapon. And when I came out the other side, I was completely soaking wet. Oh, did I mention? It was 10 degrees outside. So my clothes literally froze on me as we were walking, as if keeping up with the stride of these giant guys wasn't hard enough as it was. So finally, we get to the house we're supposed to check out. I stand outside, taking a knee behind a wall, waiting for the Rangers to do their job, waiting for them to signal me in, and suddenly, I have to pee. Really bad. I'm like, The guys can just whip it out as we're marching, but I was not given that luxury. Finally, I am so cold, I decide, fuck it. I'm going to pee. I'm going to have a moment of warmth, and then my bladder won't hurt, and then I will be good for the rest of the mission. So, in the middle of the night, outside the house of a dangerous insurgent holding up my weapon, I peed my pants. And all I could think was, oh my God, this feels so good. Like I just stepped into a warm jacuzzi for a second.
People think being an RPA pilot, remotely piloted aircraft, you probably know us as drone operators. People think our job is like playing a video game. But you have to realize that most of what we do is surveillance. We could see what's going on the ground in high definition video. And unlike regular aircraft, a drone can stay airborne for 20 hours. I cannot stress enough the importance of that kind of persistent surveillance. It has an enormous psychological effect because the terrorists on the ground, they know that we're watching them. That can become quite a deterrent. Think about it. If you're a bad guy and you know you could be watched in high def at all times, I mean, do you sleep well? Can you live a regular life? Can you use your computer? Can you go outside? Read about bin Laden and some of these other bad guys. The state that they were in when they were found, they're usually not getting great nourishment or much sunlight. They become super paranoid. So at some point, they're bound to make a mistake. And when it comes to actually striking from a screen, I want you to understand, yes, there is some sense of being removed, but it's not as significant as you'd think. Compared to piloting a jet at 15,000 feet, people are the size of ants from that distance. You drop a bomb in a valley, you see a big cloud of dust, but you can't see the aftermath. In many ways, the experience of an RPA pilot is much more intimate. Like, at one point, we had been observing this terrorist training camp for a long time. There must have been 100 adult males training to be warriors for the terrorists there. I don't want to imply that we knew these guys, but we had been watching them for, 6 to 9 months. We saw them running laps, hanging out. We watched them playing soccer, And when the time was right, we hit them in a coordinated attack with about 20,000 pounds of munitions. What's strange is that you strike, debrief, and the next thing you know, you're on the 45-minute drive home. How do you begin to explain when you walk in the door and your wife asks you, "How was your day at work, honey?"
There are questions that are hard to ask if you're in uniform. Like, how could people hate each other so much? Or, how could people do that? How could I do that? Where's God when things are horrible? When people are murdering each other? And what is murder? What is just and what's not just? My role as an army chaplain is to help our soldiers navigate those questions. I never really introduced myself. Hi, I'm Nate. My buddy Brett was killed in Afghanistan while I was back in the States finishing up officer candidate school. He was engaged to be married, but instead, he got blown up, along with 3 other guys 2 weeks before they were supposed to come home. When his unit got back, there was no help for them. All they got was, "Welcome home!" But these guys, they were messed up. I wanted to help. And I was told, well, that's what chaplains do. And I was like, aren't chaplains kind of old? And they were like, no, they help people. Well, that's what I'm going to be. Cut to me as an army chaplain, which is challenging because I'm supposed to be like, let me pray for you. And most military people are like, I don't do that. I don't even go to church. I think it's weird. So I went back to school and I got my master's in social work. And prayers are nice, but these guys, they need real help. See, for the most part, we understand injury as clinical. You know, you get injured, something's broken, and we fix it. But there are all kinds of injury. And what I often deal with is the idea of a moral injury, which is that you violate some kind of core, fundamental concept of who you are. War puts you in these impossible situations because it requires you to make the really important decisions very quickly. And most of the time in life, you don't make important decisions quickly, right? In war, you're in situations that don't make sense, and you don't make sense in them. And you become something you never imagined.
I mean, I joke and say it, but it's the truth. I have lived the life of a Lifetime movie. I mean, I should be a Lifetime movie. I mean, my life is just wild. I mean, when I met Dan, he had some scars on his chest from being shot, some stab wounds and stuff like that. But I had no idea there was so much damage I couldn't see.
No one wants to hear what's happened over there. But then at the same time, they expect us to come home and just poof, mesh back in with society and instantly become normal people. How's that supposed to happen when people hear you were in Iraq or Afghanistan and automatically think you're a psycho? Or they hear the letters PTSD and you're treated like a disease. They don't understand what they can't see, and you can't see traumatic brain injury.
It's a pretty funny story, how we met. I just got a divorce, and my cousin convinced me to work an extra job at her bar on the weekends, you know, just to keep myself busy.
We met her first night there.
You're going to think I'm crazy, to be completely honest. So I was a shooter girl. Okay. Basically, I went around and asked people if they wanted to buy a shot while wearing these shot holder belt things. I targeted this table because I could tell these guys were military. They always want to drink, and they did pretty good. So as I'm getting everything out and collecting money, I accidentally bumped into someone behind me. And when I turned around, it was Dan. And I kid you not, our eyes met and I felt something and it freaked me out.
She took off.
I did. I ran down to my cousin on the first floor and I'm like, oh my gosh, Heather, if I didn't know better, I just met this guy and I feel like I'm in love with him. And she was like, have you been drinking? Then I happened to turn around. Well, there he was. He had followed me.
Hell yeah, I followed her. I mean, I had seen her across the room and I said to the guys, oh my God, that's the girl of my dreams. And they gave me a hard time. Like, yeah, right. I bet you won't even get her number. And I said, no, I'm going to marry that girl.
15 years and 3 kids later, here we are. There's the twins, both boys, they're 6, and my daughter's 13. And then there's my 2 from my first marriage, but they're in their early 20s, so they don't really have to deal with all this stuff anymore.
I broke my neck in 2001, but I didn't come home until 2002.
I had no idea his neck had been broken. I mean, it still is. It never healed correctly. He's been walking around in pain, but he didn't tell me for the longest time. Of course, now I can look back and different things make sense.
I didn't want her to know.
I mean, when he came home, I mean, literally at the airport, I could tell that something was not right. It's like his soul was different. You know, he started having these outbursts that he'd never had before. I mean, this tender-hearted, great guy basically turned into a bully. I mean, He threatened to kill me many times. And no one would be able to find me or prove that he did it because he would feed me to the turtles. Because turtles eat everything, the bones, everything. I mean, this is what he told me, right?
Fun fact I learned from a guerrilla faction when I was once deployed to El Salvador.
Yeah, for a long time, I didn't feel comfortable telling anybody about this. I mean, I think it was just in shock, or maybe scared. I mean, the military trained him to kill people.
They program us to be machines, but then they don't deprogram us to bring us home.
He was having flashbacks and night terrors. Oh, once he was dead asleep having what seemed like a terrible nightmare. And I reached out for him and he grabbed me, threw me against the wall and broke my wrist.
I didn't even wake up. I didn't even know till the next day.
He didn't.
Why do you think you stayed with me?
I have no idea. I mean, all I can think is God. Yeah, at one point I didn't feel comfortable talking about all this.
I wanted to talk about it.
Well, I finally gave him an ultimatum. I said, you either get some sort of help and get me involved or I'm leaving. And we went to the VA the next day. And I said, I am not in the medical field, but I want him checked out, head to toe. I want x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, I don't know, do them all. Well, lo and behold, that's where they found he had a brain injury. And they'd already diagnosed him with severe PTSD and manic depressive disorder. I mean, he was on more medication than my 93-year-old grandmother. So he wasn't on the right medication and he wasn't getting the right treatment. And because I hadn't been treated for so long, he now has early signs of dementia.
It wasn't until 3 weeks ago I had my first treatment for TBI, and that wasn't even through the VA. At Mass General, they discovered the crystals in my ear had been knocked loose from all the explosions.
Yeah, and that's why he was throwing up and having migraines. Not to mention the double vision that had him running into walls. He even dislocated his shoulder once. I mean, just imagine feeling like you were never walking straight. I mean, I'd be depressed and angry. And then you add the PTSD, and then you add the brain injury.
They did something called vestibular therapy. When Kim came to see me in Boston, I couldn't believe it. I said, Kim, I only see one of you.
Yeah, and I saw a glimpse of the old Dan. And I mean, it was just so worth this whole journey because I feel like he's still in there. After everything, I still have so much love for him. I do. Don't want to sometimes. He's been buried under all this ugly, but it's not his fault. I know Danny's heart. And I can't give up on him, man. I just can't.
The thing is, it isn't just the physical injuries. The things I saw, they don't leave you alone. Sometimes I look at my kids and I think about this boy. It's one little boy. I used to see him every day. He came by our fob and he would, talk to us. We'd play with him. I gave him candy, food, all sorts of things. His name is Use. It's like, yes, but it's Use. And he, one day he starts walking toward the compound. For some reason, I was up at the gate and I could see part of his shirt was bulged up. And I yelled at him, no, back up, back up, back up. And I could tell the look on his face. They packed him full of explosives because they knew he could make it onto the compound. They did things like that. And I'm like, no. And this little kid, the look on his face, and I kept screaming for him to stop until one of our guys They sniped him. The sniper took him out. You know? Yeah. They took him out. Let me ask you, you ever been like driving and you go to make a lane change and then there's a car there and you got to get back in your lane real quick. And then like 2 or 3 seconds later, you have like pricklies go through your whole body and you feel like your heart's going to explode. That's what it's like living with PTSD every day. You feel that anxiety, that holy shit, that oh my God feeling every single second of every single day. But like the Major said earlier, shit happens, then you drive on.
You drive on.
You drive on.
You drive on.
Drive on.
Drive on.
We drive on. Most of us don't have a clean relationship with service. War will break your heart. I tell my units, don't serve on behalf of America. I know that's the narrative that we give you, but do it because it's your choice, right? Do it because you feel like it's needed. But don't view it like the way we have with past wars, where they say, thank you for your service, and you're like, I fought for you. Most people are detached from the costs of war, but we have to find a way to share that burden somehow. I say this all the time, whether you agree with what's happening with the military or not, you have to own some of it. That's democracy. Look, I didn't create the world this way. Yes, I know, I get that, but that doesn't mean that it's not my responsibility to fix it. I'm not asking for perfection, but I am asking for a better way of doing this. And in the meantime, you know, the little secret that I have is that anytime I'm asked to do an invocation, I always put a line in there that I look forward to the day when there is no longer a need for swords, and to be away from the people we love. Yeah. One day. Wait, you know that song? One day, one day, one day. You know that song. One day, one day, one day. One day, one day, one day. Come on. One day, one day, one day.
Well, happy Veterans Day, everyone. Thank you again very much for joining the Atlanta Council for its celebration of Veterans Day 2020. The film we've just seen and its introduction by Adrian Arsht and General David Petraeus just could not have been better. I, on behalf of the Atlanta Council, am terrifically proud of the work. It certainly succeeds right on the mission that we at the Atlanta Council had for it. But that's not all. We're now going to have a panel discussion that I've been looking forward to, frankly, as much as being able to see the film, with the playwright, Michelle Colas-Brooks, with the film's director, Seema Sueko, and with Nate Grazer. Nate is the real-life Nate from who's depicted in the film, the Army chaplain, who's depicted in the film. And very pleased to have all three of you here at the Atlanta Council, virtually anyway, to have a further discussion about this work and about the mission of the work. As the three of you know, I'll tell the audience, we want to spend about 40 minutes here just to put a capstone on what you've seen, with a discussion that reveals to you, gives all of you some context for how this work came together. Each of Michelle and Seema and Nate have a story to tell about that. Talk a little about the film itself, and the choices that the artists made about it, and the impact that Nate can testify to us that it has, at least on him, and maybe by extension other veterans. And then a conversation, as importantly, about where this work goes. How can from the Atlanta Council's point of view, the mission of this work keep going next year, and from the artistic point of view, what are the vectors off of which this work will extend into greater things for each of you individually and all of us collectively into the future. So those three topics, we'll talk about those over the next 40 minutes. And then we will draw this Atlanta Council celebration of Veterans Day 2020 to a close. Part of the Atlanta Council where I work, and which is principally responsible for the creation of this film, Veterans Day 2020, is the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. The director of the Scowcroft Center is Barry Pavel, and he, among the things that the techniques or the innovations that Barry is insisting upon to try to prosecute the mission of the Scowcroft Center is the use of arts and creativity, the conjunction of arts and creativity with more traditional, stuffy, at least by their outside reputation, experts and professionals in national security, to see if we can't uncrack some of the perennial problems of national security, and to coin a phrase, to think different about these problems. Artists, I have found, have helped us do that, and that brings me to the starting point of, from my point of view, how this project got going. In the course of that work, I got to know Michelle Colas-Brooks. And to cut a story that I shouldn't make long short, she and I were having lunch one day out in Los Angeles when she started to tell me about a project that she was toying with, or at least thinking about creating. And I'm going to ask Michelle to explain that moment to us, and maybe come back later in this conversation to explain how this more directly relates to an Atlanta Council mission that I happen to have in my pocket and couldn't figure out what to do with. So Michelle, pick it up from lunch at the Superba on Lincoln Avenue in Venice, California.
Yes, so we talked about theater a little bit, and you know, what happened was that I had absolutely no connection to the military at all. I live in a world where I know a lot of artists, I know a lot of terrific people, but I literally do not know one person in any of my worlds who served in the military. And my husband, who has a great interest in the military, would talk to some people.
The novelist Max Brooks, it must be said.
Okay, yes, him. He would come home and he would talk to me about some military stuff. And to me, there was, there's weapons, there's, stuff that doesn't particularly interest me. But
right.
Then he started telling me some stories of some of the people that he had met. And every one of them was surprising to me. And I remember saying to him, somebody ought to interview these people and get their stories to humanize them, because these are all surprising to me. And then I realized, oh, that's what I do. maybe I'm the one that should go out.
You were a journalist before you were a playwright.
Yes, I had a life as a journalist before I sort of moved over into playwriting. And so when I was fortunate to have lunch with Steve at Superba, I sort of threw this idea out at him to see if it would stick. And what I had in mind was kind of using the paradigm of what Eve Ensler did with the vagina monologues, which was to take stories, to work with those stories, to curate them, and then to have actors, talented actors, deliver them for maximum effect.
Right. So I'm going to interject, because there will be a lot of people in the audience who don't know the Vagina Monologues. The Vagina Monologues is a play by Eve Ensler, which, like the play on which this film is based, was curated from interviews with, in her case, in Eve Ensler's case, women. I just wanted to add that bit of context for an audience that might not recognize the reference.
Yes. And talking very much about women who had been in violent situations, among other things. Right. So anyway, Steve said, I think this is a good idea. I think it's something that you should think about. And so I just started making phone calls to anybody I knew who knew anybody in the military. Then I started work, and it was by far the most gratifying work I've ever done. And I really didn't know if anybody was going to talk to me, because I don't know anything about the military. But I found when I went in and said, hey, I don't know anything about the military. You have a lot of acronyms. You have a lot of stuff that I don't understand. But I think if you can translate your stories and your feelings about the military, if you can tell them to me, who doesn't know them and who doesn't understand anything about the military, then maybe I can be your translator and tell your stories to people like me who've never had any association with anybody in the military. Because we're all, which I've understood on some level, but I didn't really understand until I started talking to people, is that we're all responsible for the people that go out and fight for us, right? Yeah, yeah. And so if you don't know them, if I don't know them, it's harder for me to care about them. And so
by extension, although it wasn't really your aim, but by extension, you don't care about what America's doing in the world more generally, beyond its use of the military. Is the way you came to meet and interview Nate illustrative of the way you did most of these interviews?
Yeah, I mean, it was just tossing it out there. Somebody else that I interviewed knew Nate and said, you really ought to talk to Nate. Nate's a good guy to talk to. And I just called him cold like anyone else, and we started talking, and we have not stopped talking, I think, for a couple of years now.
What was that? You must remember that moment, or the succession of moments, Nate. What were your expectations of this Venice, California-based playwright giving you a call to tell stories?
Yeah, it's not every day that somebody calls and actually wants to hear about your military service. I mean, it's really, Steve, you can probably count on one hand the amount of people who have actually asked you. Yeah, so I was curious, and she was, I also was really, one of the things that's wonderful about Michelle is that she's just very curious, and she approached it like, I know nothing, tell me all about it. Wait, hold on, so wait, now what happened? No, I'm sorry, I don't know. What is that word you just used? What's a sergeant or a NCO? Can you say that again? Hold on, what was that? And you could tell she's like taking notes on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Like, what was that word you used again?
Sure.
And there's something that's very endearing and disarming about that. Like vets are typically pretty suspect, and so someone's.
But I think you were susceptible to the conversation because you knew that there were stories that needed to be told, or that there was something America didn't understand. Do I have that right?
I don't think I was that enlightened yet. I think
okay.
I think a friend of mine.
I got to tell you what, this character she wrote based on you is.
Yeah, I think you know, like anything, I think I grew with Michelle in this too. I think that's a really important part. I think it's not one-sided. I think both of us have grown together in this, and I think that's an important part. That it's not just better for everyone, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But it's also good for the vets to be able to share a story and talk about and sort of say, yeah, that happens, or this, yeah, that's part of how this works.
Yeah.
And I think that was. I honestly entertained the phone call originally because my friend said, "Hey, this woman Michelle is going to call you. Just pick up her phone." Pick up. Oh, all right. I guess I will.
See what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just turn back. Anything you want to amplify about the process, which actually is just absolutely central to how this all came together, of talking to these veterans. Michelle, you want to add anything before I turn to Seema's part of this journey?
Well, I think, one thing something that really struck me was that, like Nate said, I couldn't believe that nobody had asked people about their stories. That was so stunning to me. And I would say almost every single person that I talked to thanked me for listening to their story. I felt very grateful that they were actually telling it to me, but they were actually just so moved that somebody actually wanted to hear their story. And, I live in LA. I mean, everyone's telling their stories all the time. Everyone loves telling their stories. So I couldn't imagine.
Town full of stories, yeah.
Yeah, it's a town full of stories. So I couldn't imagine that everybody wasn't wanting to tell their stories all the time. And it turns out a lot of people did want to tell their stories. And I had to go in always saying, if you change your mind, that's fine. If you say anything that you want to take back, that's fine. There's nothing here. I'm not trying to get anybody. I'm not trying to make something happen. I have zero agenda except to just hear you. Mm-hmm. And that opened up a lot of doors, and I got a lot back from that. I got a lot back. And I talked to Nate, and I asked Nate who I should talk to, and I talked to Steve and another Steve, and he told me someone else to talk to, and it really just it was very easy. There's a few people that turned me down. There was a few people that flaked out, but all in all, I had a lot of conversations.
So over the couple of years since Michelle started that hard work, the Atlantic Council has continued to support and develop and promote the play through a staged reading, through a workshop production last fall. And off of those experiences, which were well received, it was our ambition this year to stage a big stage reading at a big theater, either in Washington or somewhere else, and really give a big tailwind to this great work and to its further development. And then there came the pandemic. So all of you would either know or can certainly imagine readily, if you didn't know it, that live theater is shut down across this country and pretty much across the world, with just a few exceptions. And so consequently, this ambition that was pretty well developed in late spring suddenly came to naught, or looked like it might came to naught. And then I was browsing around the theater offerings here in Washington, D.C., and I came across a short film produced at the Arena Stage Theater called, is it May 20th or May 22nd?
May 22, 2020.
May 22nd, 2020, which was a time capsule. You can say what you want, or you can characterize it as you would. For me, it was a time capsule of the pandemic in Washington. And I was intrigued by the fact that a theater company had done this, and I thought it was really well done. And so I sought out and ultimately was put in touch with Seema. Although not that long ago, for the high quality of what you all just saw on the screen, I hope and expect you'll be surprised to know that I think our first conversation was not until the first week of August.
That's accurate. I was just remembering that. And of course, it also feels like a lifetime ago.
Indeed, right.
But first of all, Stephen, I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity to work on this project, and to thank everybody at the Atlantic Council. It's been a real honor for us at Arena Stage to partner in this way with this very great think tank, the Atlantic Council, and to dive into these stories. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Mm-hmm. So from there, right, some guy in a think tank calls you and says, hey, I got a play I'd like made into a movie.
Well, Yes, well, first we should also let the public know that, Stephen, you have a theater background as well, which is why you shared this joint love of theater
We
and
do.
policy.
Right.
And as you and I spoke on the phone, we discovered that we both shared these two loves. I have a master's degree in international relations with a focus on Middle East politics. But and I think I may have shared with you that the very first professional play I ever
did.
did was A Piece of My Heart by Shirley Laurel, which
Right.
was about the women who served in the Vietnam War, also drawn from interviews. And it made such a profound impact on my life as an artist, because the little theater where I did it, which was outside of Chicago, called Circle Theater, that director connected with the veteran community there. And there was one particular veteran I remember. He was called Short Round. And Short Round and his family every Saturday would make hundreds of sandwiches. And then they would go to all the alleys, underneath every bridge, all the back streets throughout Chicago, and feed homeless veterans with these sandwiches. I
Yeah.
was so moved. And he came and saw that play about 10, 12 times. And every time he brought more vets. And that brought to me the power of this connection between artists and veteran communities. Indeed, almost a decade later, when I was in San Diego running a theater company, I produced that play again and had a chance to connect with Veterans Village of San Diego.
But little did I
the
know how
Veterans Museum.
susceptible
Yes.
you would be to this when I brought it to you. And yet,
That's right.
like you say, within the first 20 minutes of our conversation, there was a lot of consonance between our impulse for the sort of work that art can serve.
Exactly. But then, of course, the question was, how the heck are we going to do this in the middle of a pandemic?
Except
And
that I'd seen you do it, so I
Yes.
knew that you had a key to something.
Right. You had seen the films we were making at Arena
Right.
Stage, but that was all filmed in person and outdoors around the Washington, D.C. area. And along with that, as the union SAG-AFTRA was getting more and more savvy.
The Actors
to
Union, the Screen Actors Guild.
To artists working in these conditions, the precautions and the safety needs, COVID tests that everybody needs to take, became interesting obstacles that we wondered whether we wanted to navigate. But at the same time, I was reconnecting with a theater artist I've worked with before, Jared Mizzachi. He's a projection designer in live theater. And he had created a team called VidCo, Virtual Design Collective.
Yep.
And they had discovered a way to use projection software called Isadora, pipe it through Zoom to be able to create live events and filmed projects that break down these Zoom boxes and allow you to edit, cue in different effects. And once I saw that, I thought, this is the way.
In the movie, the cool
There
stuff
we go.
in the film.
Yeah. And so I thought this might be the way. And so I reached back out to you and said, would you be open to this approach? And the other thing, that undercurrent, was this idea of it's Veterans Day 2020. 2020 is a unique year. And rather than trying to run away from it or hide that we're in a pandemic, to embrace it and embrace that we are communicating, trying to connect with people through these screens.
Yep.
And what would it mean to actually make that a hallmark of how this particular story is told in this particular year, in this particular moment. So I thank you and the Atlantic Council for being willing to go down this road. And Michelle, speaking with you about it, I know at first everybody was like, oh, a Zoom play, that sounds awful. But I appreciate that you took that leap of faith to go with us on this. Thank you.
Well, it was a little bit of a leap, but it didn't seem all that hard because of your conviction. You had a conviction that this would be great, that this could be great. And I talked with you enough to take confidence from your conviction. In general, what working with artists I do, that's what I'm always looking for. If they've got conviction about something, nothing will stand in their way, in my experience with them. Well, let me turn the page a little bit and actually pick up right from where you were, Seema. I think one of the great satisfactions of the film for me, I hope for others in the audience, is the fact that this was both, it's obvious in one respect that it was produced with Zoom, but but it, like you say, it went so far beyond the boundaries of what those of us who day to day in business experience Zoom to be. And I actually think in this moment there was something kind of heartening about that. That it was a demonstration of another of the impositions of this damned pandemic that we fought back against, that we transformed into a work of art. I wonder if you pick up the second chapter of our conversation by talking about that, talking about the artistic choices you made. You've already indicated one of them. Let's embrace, if that's the right term, the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic rather than walking away from it. Could you say more about that?
Well, I hearken back to what Adrienne Arsht said in her opening remarks about resilience.
Mm-hmm.
A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and this was an opportunity for the art form to grow, to expand, and an opportunity for me as an artist to direct for the first time in this particular platform, and that was truly exciting. But with any project, the first question we always ask as directors is, why is this play necessary now?
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the now we're living in, and certainly the now of just a few weeks ago when we started speaking, or a few months ago, we live in such a polarized nation where we're in our silos, we're in our corners, and we don't know one another. We've othered and not humanized each other. And when you said to me, when I asked you, why did you commission this play in the first place?
Right.
And you said it was to humanize people who serve in the military, that really spoke to my heart. And I think that humanization goes both ways, that as an artist, I feel when I get to interact with veterans, that I also get to reveal myself and be humanized in the same way that they are humanizing themselves as they're telling us their stories.
Yeah.
So that became the action, the primary action to make the film was to humanize, in some ways to fight for humanity that each of these characters are doing in different ways. I say characters, but real life people who Michelle
They deserve the
interviewed.
humanity they deserve to be
Absolutely.
recognized.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, this allows me to thread back in my piece of this narrative, and that is to say, there's a line, or at least a reference in General Petraeus's remarks about this deficit, this civic deficit, and the need ultimately to create affinity among ordinary Americans. And maybe that's a tall order, but I think that's what's called for. Well, one of the effective, to my ears and eyes, great choices that you made in the script was to have everyone introduce themselves by how and why did you get in the military? That was brilliant. In what, the span, Nate, I see you nodding, right? In the span of 30 seconds and 6 interjections, we were off and running with each of those characters just off of that introduction, as a for example. Would you agree, Nate, that just asking why'd you join the military goes a long way toward understanding who the folks are in the military? Or is that too simplistic?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with something as simple as why'd you join, right? And then that, like one of the things that we talk about here is like just some curiosity towards a person's service. Because veterans are humans, right? They're people who have these complexities, and they join for a lot of reasons, and they serve for a lot of reasons, and they have a lot of different experiences. It's not just, polarizing, and it's more complicated than that. I think it's one of the things I really appreciate about the film, right? Is that it demonstrates this sort of complexity, right? It's very hard to say a veteran is after the thing. You're like, after the film, you go, veterans a lot of things, right? There's a lot there.
Just like the rest of us. Yeah.
Right. I can't just put them all in a box. They all have very different experiences depending on what they did. And, and now it makes me kind of curious. I should ask the people I know who served about their experience.
Yeah. Allow me, Nate, actually to take you back to a moment. So last fall, I've alluded to the fact that we did a workshop production of the play on which the film is based. And Nate, you did us the favor of not just coming to see the play, but also staying afterward and doing what theater goers call a talkbacks. Came up on stage with me and had a conversation like this, but especially took questions from the audience. And one of the questions, and I'm going to put you on the spot again to answer, was, well, if I see a veteran or an active serving member in the airport, and I want to say something more interesting than thank you for your service, how do I engage them? You remember that question? And what was your answer?
I do. And I think the takeaway for that is an expression of curiosity, right? If you really want to know, just say, hey, where'd you serve? Who'd you serve with? Just a little bit of a question mark can go a long way, and you'd be surprised, especially if you ask where somebody served or where they're serving. They'll be like, oh, which place? Yeah. Oh yeah, did you ever serve there? Do you know someone who served there? Right? It's your identity, your unit,
and your story, right? Because where'd you serve is the start of a story, and so you can elicit a story that way. I don't know, Michelle, if we can circle back to you, is that you probably didn't have that thought in your parlance where you serve, because as you've already admitted, you were working from an easier starting point, like.
Well, my starting point was, why did you serve? I mean, that was my question, because I really couldn't imagine any circumstances under which I would sign up to do that. And so, and what surprised me was that every single story was different. Every story was different.
And from both a journalist's point of view, you weren't a working journalist at the time, but certainly from a storyteller's point of view, they were great stories, right? You struggled. We've talked about the worst part of your job, which is the cutting that's necessary, right?
Yes. And sometimes, I mean, I think that's where my original idea about curating stories, where I got to really indulge in that, was to, sometimes when you have 2 hours worth of material, there isn't like necessarily a cohesive story that's being told from top to bottom. But when when you go over it and over and over it, you start to make these connections, and you realize how many people speak in connections, even if they're not doing it deliberately. So, and it was through studying their stories and then studying stories in relation to each other that I could also start finding the connections between the stories.
Right. And then as we learned in the workshop, the placement and arrangement of them becomes very, very important to the way it comes off. Well, Nate, I'll give you the last word on this portion of our conversation. Does the play work? You're actually say a word about what you do day to day. Actually, your character said it in the film, but you get to say it in your own words. If those weren't your own words, what do you do, and how does this film speak to that day to day work and journey that you're on?
Yeah, what's interesting about this work, I have a little bit of an angel thing going on here.
That's right. That just adds to the whole effect. I
know. I'm a chaplain. So I am a chaplain in the.
Yeah, let's remind people you're the character Nate from the film, who is the Army chaplain.
That's right. So I the narrator, or the sort of who walks people through. And my role as a chaplain really functionally is to help people make sense of some of the mess that military life can bring on you. And so I sit with people all the time and try to help them put together pieces of their life, maybe take them apart. And so, one of the things I really appreciate about this film and the play itself is that it leaves complexity where it is. And I think it's very difficult to do that, especially in a world where we like everything to be, black and white, red, blue. It's very, right? But what I love about it is that it complicates things, because people's military service is complicated, and sometimes your best moment's next to your worst moment, and sometimes, I think Michelle tracked on those things really well, and a lot of the conversations that we had, it tells it honestly, right? People have really wonderful stories and really difficult stories, and their stories of homecoming are often mixed,
right?
Filled with heartache and filled with blessing, and you meet your child, but you lose your job, right? It's like the best moments.
Or you survive Root Gold, but you get breast cancer.
Right. That's right. These these challenges. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about this, is that it does humanize, to Seema's point. It does this deep work of humanizing and sort of making you see like, oh, there are people like me who wear the uniform, right? Who've taken on this burden, an additional burden to complicate their life in the name of.
You know, I agree. If I may just build on that, I do think, Michelle, one of the great achievements of the script is to leave complexity in the audience's lap, but at the same time create a satisfying experience, is I guess the only way I would put it. Right, that's some magic there that you've accomplished, and in turn rendered very, very beautifully, Seema. But that's a special thing that I think Nate's got his finger on. Right, these are not you didn't nothing terribly tidy about it, but in its whole, it's real, and it speaks to, and this is what I want to turn to. It speaks to it speaks to some civic work. I mean, that's my word. Those are my words now. And why don't we stick with Nate while we open up this last chapter of our conversation? What is that work, Nate? Just say a little bit more about the particular challenges, and you face a bunch of them, but especially in the relationship between what I will continue to call ordinary Americans, ordinary good-hearted Americans, and soldiers, sailors, veterans, warriors, as I would prefer to call them. What's that work that needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of work to do. So I think, for one, the context that soldiers live is one of, even the fact how we're doing this, right? I think, to Seema's point, we are separated, right? We are a very, very divided country, and that is felt with warriors, right? It's very difficult to come home to a community that barely exists. So what we find is that warriors are experiencing that disconnect more and more. Right? People get out of the military to a community that's already fragmented, that's already divided by lines and lines and lines of identity and partisanship, whatever it is, right? And so I think the work is this sort of bridge building, is to find a way to build a bridge so that vets don't get lost on the way home. We were talking earlier. This is one of the oldest things that have plagued warriors. The stories of like some of the ancient Greek stories of Ajax or Agamemnon, their failed homecomings, right? Yep. The stories of warriors who couldn't make it all the way home. Even the story of Philoctetes is the story of a warrior whose wounds stunk, and so he got stranded on the island of Lemnos. These are stories that speak to the difficulty of making it home. And I think one of the things that we have to do now is find a way to help make those bridges. And I think what I see in this film is this journey that a bridge has two sides, right? Yeah, two people who are translating and make a place where people can cross over and understand the other's perspective, maybe connect with them and their experience. And so that's what I see here, and I think we have to figure out more creative ways to do that.
And that is meaningful. That is resonant with the work you see that needs to be done. Again, among us and for veterans.
Yeah, and I my role as a chaplain is I sit with a lot of young soldiers who are struggling.
Right.
They ask me, I don't know how to live. They say, like, I'm wandering. I mean, in less words, they say, I since I've gotten out, I'm not sure how to live anymore. Literally, there's an epidemic of suicide, but really it's a crisis of life. It's a crisis that warriors don't know how to live in this world. And I think one of the things that I think we're trying to do, or that I see in this film, is that this try to find a way to allow warriors to live, to build a bridge so they can come home and find meaningful ways to engage and live in the world again.
Yeah. We shouldn't, we don't have time to talk about it here, but the crisis of suicide in the military is actually getting worse at the moment. Michelle, what's the further work and ambition you have for your play, War Words?
So my ultimate dream, my ultimate goal with this piece is for it to, and I love what Seema did with this film, and I'm so thrilled that it's been able to live. But beyond that too, I would love to see it, obviously live in the theater again, and sort of following the paradigm of what Eve Ensler did with the vagina monologues, and she created something called V-Day. So every Valentine's Day, the play can be licensed for free from at any theater, and then all the proceeds from those productions go to organizations to support women in crisis. And my ultimate goal for this piece would be to be able to license it every Veterans Day, and for all those proceeds to be able to go to some kind of veterans organization to be agreed on. Maybe it's this, Nate, maybe it's about how helping vets transition into real life. They get trained to go into the military, but they don't necessarily get trained to come back in to day-to-day life here. Right. So that to me would be the ultimate goal of this piece. And because personally it's been so painful to me to have to cull these pieces and not tell the entire stories, I think I would eventually like to see some kind of supplementary platform, like maybe it's online, where the full stories can live, and where maybe other veterans can tell their stories, and they can at least live somewhere and people can see them and hear them, and we can notice their purpose. So those are the big fantasies.
Tell you and I have conspired about this before, and Barry Pavel has authorized me, if you will, to assure you and assure the audience the Atlantic Council is going to stick with this. The Atlantic Council is going to promote that tradition next year. But the more important thing for the audience to know is we're not trying to own that tradition. What we want is for that tradition to propagate and live in all sorts of places that we don't even know about or necessarily motivate. If you need some help picking up that tradition next Veterans Day and doing a stage greeting or more of the play War Words, let us know. But don't wait for us. If you are turned on by what we've done here and the larger civic purpose of it, put it on your calendar and do it. And Michelle commits to us that she'll give you a license to perform it for free.
Can I add something to that, Stephen? I just want to
something to that, and then pick up, please. I wanted to draw you out on a larger thesis that again, unawares, that you were working toward. Is something that I hope Arena Stage and the Atlantic Council will continue to cultivate next year. But start with the point you wanted to make, please.
I wanted to emphasize for folks who just watched the film that you just saw, a 37-minute excerpt of the full play, and that there are other characters, other individuals in the full-length play that Michelle wrote. It was indeed painful to have to edit it down because there were so many wonderful stories. So I do encourage folks to pick this up, and every Veterans Day, do a staged reading of this, and take that opportunity to humanize yourself and humanize veterans and active duty military, and just build community intentionally and deliberately as best as we all can.
I think it expresses in maybe a still more interesting way this idea that we at the Atlantic Council have of joining artistry to these serious issues of national security and other issues about public policy more generally. So talk to us about that, how this work fit into that. And then we will unfortunately have to draw our really great conversation to a close. Seema?
Absolutely. Well, consensus organizing for theater is an artistic methodology that I created. I adapted it from the traditional form of consensus organizing, which is a type of community organizing used in community redevelopment and social work. But the idea is about mutual self-interest. So in this case, it's about a theater building a stake in various pockets of communities, and those communities building stake back in the theater by surfacing and organizing around mutual self-interest. as just an example here with this particular project,
Right.
Arena Stage every year throws a military Thanksgiving. This is when we invite military families to come to the theater. They get a free meal, and then they see whatever musical we happen to be playing at that time.
For those who don't know, Arena Stage is 4 blocks from Fort McNair in Southwest Washington.
That's right. That's right. And we also have a program with Blue Star Families that offers discounted tickets to Blue Star families throughout the year. Of course, none of this we can do right now during the pandemic. And so, Stephen, when you reached out, it was quite serendipitous because we were wondering how do we serve that interest we have to be able to connect with and serve the veteran and military communities. And this became a way to do it in 2020 in this very extraordinary moment that we're all living in.
Yeah. So there's lots of talk in business, in government, all around about partnership, about and it's almost lost content. This phrase. Well, this experience is a richly filled experience of partnership with great content to it, way beyond the words. It's been my tremendous pleasure getting to know you, Nate. Working with you, Michelle, working with you and the Arena Stage, SEMA, and we will keep doing that in the year ahead, just in the ways that we have talked about here, and hopefully in some ways we haven't yet imagined. Hopefully we will get some responses from the audience who saw this, who have their own ideas for how to pick up the baton, take the impulse that this work and this conversation perhaps has generated in them, and themselves do something great to shorten that distance between veterans and ordinary Americans or any other ordinary person, so that progressively year over year we can have better and better Veterans Days. Thank you, the three of you. Thanks to all of you here in the audience. I hope this has made your Veterans Day special, as I assure you it has mine and the rest of us here at the Atlantic Council. Farewell. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.